I want us to talk today and maybe have a class discussion for a little bit about affirmative action in the workplace. And I thought we could use this very famous legal case as a way of crystallizing that. So let me read this for all of us. Sorry, I'd have you guys go around and read it individually, but I got to get this on the video. In 1974, the United Steelworkers of America and Kaiser Aluminum Chemical Corporation entered into a master collective bargaining agreement that covered terms and conditions of employment at 15 Kaiser factories. The agreement included an affirmative action plan designed to eliminate racial imbalances in Kaiser's skilled workforces. It reserved for black employees 50% of the openings in in-plant craft training programs until the percentage of black craft workers in a plant became commensurate with the percentage of blacks in the local labor force. Prior to 1974, only about 4% of Kaiser's skilled craft workers were black, even though the local workforce was approximately 39% black. Kaiser, rather than continuing to hire trained outsiders, decided to establish a training program to train its production workers to fill craft openings and receive the accompanying pay raises. It decided to select trainees on the basis of seniority, with the proviso that at least 50% of the trainees were to be black until the percentage of black skilled craft workers in the plant approximated the percentage of blacks in the local labor force. During the plan's first year of operation, 7 black and 6 white craft trainees were selected from the plant's production workforce. The most senior black trainee had less seniority than several white production workers whose bids for admission were rejected. Now, Brian Weber, one of the rejected white production workers, then instituted a class action suit in federal district court. Weber alleged that because the affirmative action program gave preferential treatment to junior black employees over senior white employees, he and other white employees had been discriminated against. The discrimination, according to Weber, violated the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which had made it unlawful to discriminate because of race in the hiring and selection of apprentices for training programs. Now, here are the facts. Brian Weber is 32 years old and has worked as a laboratory assistant at a chemical plant. His company, Kaiser Aluminum and Chemical Corporation, has had a policy of allowing whites and blacks into a training program on a one-to-one basis, even though there are many more white applicants than blacks. This policy arose from a collective agreement with the United Steelworkers of America. Weber has been rejected by the training program. More training would have led to a pay raise. He claims that this violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The company and the union claim they are pursuing affirmative action to remedy historical disadvantages among black workers. Who's right? Okay, I want to make sure we all understand what's at stake in this case before we start discussing it. Okay, so the training program leads to pay raises. Okay, and the basis for admission to the training program had been seniority. But the company has made it public that they are instituting a new policy, and the policy is to include race as a criterion for admission to the training program and to obtain the subsequent rewards like accompanying pay raises. And Weber has been rejected from the program. It appears on the basis of race. Okay, so let's have at it. Suppose you're the jury members and you get to decide this case. I want to hear first from people who would rule in favor of Kaiser and United Steelworkers of America, so the company. Who would rule in favor of the company, and if so, on what basis? Oh, surely everyone in the room can't be against affirmative action? Really? Okay, well, let's get discussion started then. Who would rule in favor of Weber? And on what basis? Okay, those of you who would rule in favor of Weber, why? Why would you rule in favor of Weber? Okay. We are in Texas, so it's conservative. Yeah. Good. Okay. Yeah. So they're choosing people who are less qualified, and that discriminates against Weber. Okay. Now, I think actually in this particular case, the criterion that they had previously been using was seniority, which isn't necessarily a merit-based criterion, but it's kind of a proxy for merit. But we could come up with, hundreds, thousands of other cases where there is merit in play and it is overridden by virtue of race. Okay, so this is a powerful argument. The argument is that affirmative action is, it doesn't make the decision for the company on the basis of what the company ought to be making the decision on, namely something like merit or seniority in this case. And I guess even when it comes to seniority, you could say, well, that's an example of, that's a manifestation of loyalty, which ought to be rewarded. Okay, so there is that. Let me put some arguments up here on the board. One argument against affirmative action, perhaps the most powerful argument against affirmative action, is that it discriminates on the basis of factors that people can't control, including especially race. None of us could control how we were born. What we can control in life are things like how hard we work, the skills that we develop, the amount of time we spend at a company, and hence the loyalty that we have to a company. Those are things that are under our control. But an argument against affirmative action might be that it is unfair because it discriminates on things people can't control. Let's just say stuff people can't control. Okay, that's a powerful argument. All right, let me hear from some others. Ooh. Okay. So, oh wow, this is powerful. Okay, so our ancestors made mistakes. So goes this argument. But it would also be a mistake to continue to use race as a criterion for carving up society and for making decisions about hiring and firing and social advancement and social rejection. Okay, that is powerful. And I assume that was what was implicit in the idea that that you can't remedy a past mistake by a future mistake, namely that mistakes were done in the past based on race, and any future use of race would also be a mistake as well. Okay, so racism is bad. And I mean, if you look historically at like all the evils that have come about as a result of race-based thinking, I kind of doubt that there's going to be much controversy here. Okay, racism is bad, and AA for affirmative action is racism. Okay, those are two arguments against affirmative action. Can anyone come up with an argument for affirmative action, even if you don't agree? Apparently I didn't have any takers who agreed with the company. Can anyone articulate an argument for it? Yeah. Yeah, okay, good, I like that. So let's think this one through. I think all of us would agree in the society today in America, there is in some pockets maybe a lot of explicit racism, and in some pockets a lot of implicit racism, and in general there are injustices based on race. I don't think that that's controversial. And when you have affirmative action, that can remedy injustices. Remedies injustices in the society. Forcing companies to make decisions, like if the government institutes it as a policy that's required or something like that. Society, yes? Sort of. I can't spell when I'm this close to the board. Okay. Forcing companies to hire on the basis of affirmative action could potentially remedy those injustices. Well, what injustices exist in the society? Let me invite us all to imagine one of them. Okay, one of the most racially segregated institutions in American culture is the public education system. It's incredibly racially segregated. If you look at the schools in the inner cities and the big cities like Houston, those schools overwhelmingly are made up of minority racial groups. And if you look at the burbs and rural areas, they have white kids, they have Asian kids in the burbs. Okay, it's very different, racially speaking. Now, I recognize that the racial composition of schools in the public school system is a result of people's free choices. It is a result primarily of people's choices about housing and where they want to live. People tend to want to live next to people who are like them. That's generally the preference that people have. Some people, though, don't have the means to just up and leave and get out and be in other locations where they might be able to send their kids to a better school. And when you look at the test scores, the kids who are in the inner city schools, heavily minority, they don't do as well as the kids who are in schools in Fort Bend County, schools up in the Woodlands, places like that. Those kids in those inner city schools don't get the same educational advantages. End of story, period. They are born into circumstances where they are not getting the same educational advantages as their peers in other settings. Now, the argument here is that's an injustice. Just like we can't control the color of our skin, how we were born, so also we can't control the socioeconomic circumstances into which we were born. Maybe after a long period of time in life, you can work your way up to a different setting. But for the first few years of life, educationally, it's kind of chosen by others and not by us. And arguably, that's an injustice. And affirmative action can make up for that injustice because the kids who don't get a leg up in life, because they are born into schools where education is, the education is not as good, the test scores don't come out as well, those kids can be helped by intentional efforts to advance them along the way in the workforce, educationally, etc., by university admissions and things like that. Okay, does that make sense? Does that argument make sense? Everybody kind of see that? Any questions about that one? Here's a second argument in favor of affirmative action. Diversity is a good thing. Diversity is a good thing. What do I mean by that? Well, think about this one this way. When you are an institution like a company and you need to make decisions, the thinking here is that it's better to have a variety of perspectives that are available in the boardroom when making those decisions. And affirmative action can advance people to positions in the, in company boards and executive levels, C-suite level execs, things like that. People who otherwise might not be able to be there. And once those people are there, they provide alternative perspectives. The diversity that they provide is actually something to be celebrated and embraced and something that strengthens the workplace culture. It's a very different kind of an argument than this one, that it remedies injustices in society. Okay, but it is one that you're increasingly hearing these days in favor of affirmative action. Okay, any other thoughts? I got a couple other arguments I want to put up on the board. Does anybody have any other ideas or things that were convincing to you as you thought about this case as we read it that swayed you one way or the other? Oh, yeah. Good intentions, but like the outcome isn't. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I think that's powerful. I guess, well, I'll go ahead and tell you guys my own views. uh, I'm in favor of affirmative action, but on the basis of poverty, not on the basis of race. So I think that um, it's good that we have intentional efforts to help people who aren't born into privileged circumstances. But the main reason I'm opposed to affirmative action on the basis of race is because I think race-based thinking just gets us in trouble. I think that everything historically has shown us that. Um, but if we do affirmative action on the basis of poverty, we can help out basically the great majority of the people who would be helped out by affirmative action on the basis of race, and we don't have to do it on the basis of race. Anyway, that's my own view for what it's worth. Um, Let me put a couple other arguments up here on the board. Reparations for historical wrongs. What do I mean by that? That argument is different than the remedies for current injustices. This argument is different because it's based on past wrongs that our ancestors have done. Without a doubt, slavery was a great evil in this country's history, without a doubt. And without a doubt also, slavery seriously harmed the African American community for generations after slavery. Okay? I don't think there's any dispute about that. And this argument asserts that some sort of compensation is necessary for the wrong that has been done there. Okay? A good deal of economic gain was achieved in the society by virtue of using slaves, paying them nothing or stripping away their rights, things like that. And the best way to remedy that is to provide some sort of compensation to contemporary people who are the descendants of the slaves from the past. Okay, to buy this argument, you have to buy the notion of group identity, buy the notion that there are such things as groups, racial groups. Okay, I know that that's controversial because there are a good number of people who think that race is just a fiction. It's just, since we all have like some place in our ancestry, like some ancestor from this and that ethnic group, it's just kind of an artificial composition. It's an artificial thing, a lot of people think. But the advocates of this argument think that race as a group identity is a real thing, and also that it's possible to identify the contemporary descendants of the slaves of the past who have suffered the historical injustice as a result of the wrongs that were done. This argument, I would say, is held by about a third of the people who advocate affirmative action. This is the biggie right here. But about a third of the people also think that a third of these people also think that reparations are needed for the past. Yeah.
Is that done off of the race-based thinking?
Yeah.
Not good. Okay.
Yeah. So, well, I personally don't favor affirmative action on the basis of race, but yeah. So reparations on the basis of race is the idea here. Yeah. I mean, massive injustices have been done in the past, and the thinking here is maybe we can right the wrongs that our ancestors did by compensating people for that. You'll often hear politicians, I think it's mostly just words that they use. I don't think that they actually ever intend it like meaningfully, but you'll often hear them like propose reparations. I think they mostly are pandering to voting bases to try to get people to vote for them, but they'll often propose reparations or something like that. Okay, one last argument against affirmative action: it harms minorities. Harms minorities. How does it do that? Well, think about it for a minute. Okay. Do you want to go to a doctor for open heart surgery who got through medical school on the basis of affirmative action? I mean, kind of hard to think that one through, right? The argument here is that it actually undermines the real meaningful accomplishments of minorities to have them advanced through society on the basis of other things than merit. It undermines their own skill sets because they aren't given the same incentives to spend all that time developing their skill sets because they know they can be passed through on the basis of race. It harms their self-esteem because they know that they can be passed through on the basis of race. And it harms their status or standing in the society because others look at them like, looking at the open heart surgeon, and others don't assess them the same way or see them as being meriting their positions in life. Okay, so the argument here is that it has a multi-pronged harm effect on minorities. This argument can be hard to understand sometimes, so maybe imagine it this way. If you go out into nature and you see a butterfly emerging from a cocoon, what ought you not to do in that circumstance? You don't help it, right? Why don't you help it? It's got to force its way out of the cocoon to become strong enough to be a butterfly on its own. Okay, and the argument here is that you don't help people along in ways that actually hurt them by undermining their ability to develop their own skills, stand on their own feet, be their own persons, fight to make it in life. Okay, because life's really hard and you gotta fight to make it. Okay, so the argument here is that actually harms minorities. Questions or comments about any of these arguments? Have any of you? Oh, sure.
Completely sidebar.
Sure. Go for it. Yep.
So, on your argument about
this one?
Yes.
Okay.
You're going to seek a doctor based on, affirmative action, and this is just personal sharing. I'm a cancer survivor,
Mm-hmm.
and to let you guys, when you choose a doctor, that had nothing to do with, in my perspective, when I was choosing a doctor, I wanted a doctor that, made an A.
Right. Okay.
Because, I mean, that was my need. So, to be honest with you, I didn't even consider the race or the ethnic background or anything like that. I just wanted the best doctor
Right.
available.
Right.
So that's just my thought.
Yeah. So the implicit in this argument is the notion that everybody is helped when the persons most qualified are the ones who advance. The people who are advancing are most helped because they have to work just as hard and do just as much to advance, and the society as a whole is helped because the best person is in that job rather than some other kind of person. But at the same time, we also need to think about arguments like, some people didn't have the advantages that enabled them to develop those skills. Some people were born into circumstances where they didn't spend the first 18 years of their lives in rigorous private school training programs, giving them an abundance of skills to make it through medical school. And so maybe some sort of remedy is necessary in order to alter the implicit and explicit structural injustices in the society. So that's something to think about on the other side of things. Okay, I'm going to